Hello, I'm Britt Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Hello, and welcome to the Loft's Wordplay and Wisconsin Book Festival's event with Matt Goldman and Allen Eskens in partnership with Mystery Writers of America Midwest Chapter. I'm Chapter President Kristen Lepionka, and I'm thrilled to be here with two of my fellow Midwestern crime writers. As we're talking, you can order their books using the bookshop link on the screen. But now let me properly introduce both of these writers. Matt Goldman is a New York Times bestselling author and Emmy Award-winning television writer. He's been nominated for the Shamus Award and Nero Award. Matt's television writing includes Seinfeld, Ellen, The New Adventures of Old Christine, and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. Matt lives in Minneapolis with his wife, 2 dogs, and 2 cats. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
And Allen Eskens is a best-selling author and the recipient of the Barry Award, Minnesota Book Award, Rosebud Award, and Silver Falchion Award. And he's been a finalist for the Edgar Award, Thriller Award, and Anthony Award. His books have been translated into 26 languages. Allen has a journalism degree from the University of Minnesota and a law degree from Hamline University. He now lives with his wife in Greater Minnesota, where he recently retired after practicing criminal law for 25 years. Welcome, Allen.
Hi, Kristen.
It's really great to have a chance to chat here with you today. I think it's very interesting. The two of you come from really opposite sort of backgrounds. Matt from comedy television writing and Allen from criminal law, yet you both wound up writing mystery novels. So what about the genre really drew you to it?
After you, Matt.
Go for it.
Well, what drew me to the genre was I was writing TV comedy and try to make this short. When the dramas in television started getting very good with The Sopranos and The Wire and shows like that, it changed the landscape of Hollywood. It made TV the cool thing to do, and people were moving from movies to TV. And comedy thought, the executives thought, we want to be cool too, like the dramas, but comedy is not cool. It's really about all of our faults. Those parts of our character we're ashamed of, but that's what makes it human. And when comedy tried to be cool, I lost interest in writing it. And I've always been a big reader. I wanted to move to drama, but I started reading crime fiction for research. And I found when you have a dead body at the beginning of your story and clues coming along, it really takes the heat off your characters from carrying the whole way of the story. And much to my surprise, when reading it, I found out it gives them way more time to just be human beings, and you can focus on their character and their relationships. And that's what attracted me to writing murder mysteries.
For sure. Human nature really comes out
Yes.
in when there's a body showing up on the page. Yeah. How about you, Alan?
I took up writing as a way to just exercise my creative side when I first got out of law school back in '92. And I initially studied writing with the idea that I wanted to be a literary novelist. I love the character side of the story and the relationship and the deeper themes. But I was a criminal defense attorney. I knew criminal law, I knew investigations, I knew courtrooms, and I would read books by authors who didn't have that background. And I would think I could do that. So it was really, that was the world I knew. And so I decided to marry that with the literary side that I love so much. And like Matt, I love the character-driven stories. So I look at my novels as the mystery is the vehicle to propel the story forward. And the characters are there to draw the reader in deeper. And that's where you get the emotions and the feelings and the thought-provoking aspect of a novel.
Do you consider yourself like you write character-driven mysteries as opposed to plot-driven mysteries, would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I will I outline vociferously, first of all, but I will outline my mystery plot as if that's the only plot I'm going to have. I want it to be twisted, I want it to be clever, well thought out. And then when I finish that, I set it aside and say, now, what is the story really about? And I look at the characters. What is the theme of the novel? And my books all are titled after the themes. They're about forgiveness and people leaving parts of themselves behind and dealing with family dynamics. So yeah, when I finish the second part of the outline, which is the personal plot, I want that to be a story strong enough to stand on its own without the mystery, and then I put the two together.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Matt, do you outline your books before you write them?
No, I don't. I don't outline. There's a couple of reasons. One is I have worked on almost 500 episodes of television. I haven't written all of them, but I've been one of the writers involved of breaking the story, seeing it go from a one-page document to a beat sheet to an outline to several drafts to being rehearsed and rewritten on the stage. So I've kind of eventually I developed a sense of story. It took a while. The other reason is, in my experience, I found outlines to be not very good predictors of how the story would turn out. So, but everybody's different and has to do it their own way. So when you don't outline, you're basically creating an outline with the characters on their feet and talking to each other and with chapter numbers and everything, and your first draft becomes your outline. So, but I don't sit down and do A happens, then B happens, then C happens. I know a little bit ahead of where I'm going. So at the end of the day, I noodle that. So I know what I'm going to at least jump in with the next day. But
yeah.
I don't outline.
Yeah.
What about you?
I write sort of similar. I don't do a really detailed outline. I have kind of a general structure. I am really impressed by writers who do like super thorough outlines. I think that's amazing. Yeah. And like it would save so much of the like hand wringing during the process. I feel like I heard of fellow Midwestern writer Jeffrey Deaver will write like 70 or 75 page outlines. And to me, that's just like, that's so amazing. But it's also like, I would rather just write the first 75 pages of the book.
Yeah.
But it's like everybody, you ask that question of 100 writers, will get 100 different answers.
You will. I mean, I heard an author named Jennifer Egan who wrote Manhattan Beach. The way she described it better than I've been able to describe it, which is she does an outline and her first drafts are a mess and she gets stuck. Like she'll have a few days where she can't move forward because she doesn't know how to. But the going for a walk, the taking a shower, the sleeping on it leads her to find an answer that comes from her subconscious. And that makes her stories more unique to her. But I've been a professional writer my whole life, really, since I was 21 years old. And so I never had to develop a brain like Alan had to be a criminal defense attorney. So I don't think I have the ability to use that other side of my brain the way Alan does. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's really impressive.
Well, the outlining actually comes out of I've always been a huge daydreamer. And so as I daydream, I just write down my thoughts and ideas. And as they start to percolate and some of the better ideas float to the top, I then focus on them and do different tangents on what could happen if I went this way or this way, this way. And outlining is kind of a way to slow down my thoughts, because my brain's always just flashing like that. And so by writing it down, I'm slowing it down, and then I can look at it later and pick the idea that I think is best and work that through to the end. And when you talked about people having writer's block or having difficulty going to the next part, the wonderful thing about outlining is I never have a day where I have writer's block. I've never had writer's block in all the years I've been writing, because I know the outline. If my story diverts from the outline, fine. If it's a better idea, I'll then go back to my outline and re-outline using this new tangent. But that way, I always have this blueprint. So I get up in the morning, I'm excited to go downstairs and write, and the ideas are in my head, just waiting to jump on the page.
Now, do you find that your characters diverge from your outlines a lot? Do they kind of get a mind of their own?
Not a whole lot. It's important to me, and Matt probably knows this better than anyone as a screenwriter. It's important to me to know the core of who the characters are, even the minor characters, before I start writing, because if I know who they are at their core, I know how they're going to be in a particular scene. So that's why I think about a novel for months, maybe even years before I start writing it. I want to know who these people are, so that when I write that first scene, this character is going to be looking at the room from their perspective. How they see the room is different from how someone else might see the room. But because I have already spent time with them in the daydreaming and outlining process, I know how they're going to see that room and how they're going to react to people and how they're going to react within a scene. And that's important for me in my process.
Matt, do you find that your characters kind of get a life of their own, or do you pretty much know what to expect from them in each scene too?
No, I find they get a life of their own. I know who they are going in, and I know the core of their values and things. But as the story escalates and becomes more intense, and pressures build and conflicts intensify, sometimes I find a dialogue coming out of their mouth that I didn't expect. And then I have to think about the story I have so far, and does that dialogue feel organic to who that person is? And if so, and I want to keep it, do I have to go back and change anything to make that track? So, but I do very much find them, most of my writing experience, I've written some drama, but most is in half-hour comedy, and most of that is in the multicam with the live audience, like Seinfeld. And those shows are all dialogue. So much character comes from dialogue because we're limited in how many sets we can have. And when you're shooting in front of a live audience, you're basically in a sound stage. You don't go out very much. And so that's really what I know best, how to show character through dialogue. And so stuff does happen on its feet that I have to adjust for.
I think that's sometimes the most fun part for me, is like sort of seeing what I wasn't expecting to happen. And then like, there it is. And it's like, of course. So Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about the series character that you write about?
Nil Shapiro is a private investigator. He grew up in Minneapolis. He went to the Minneapolis Police Academy, and right after his class graduated, they were laid off, which really happened in Minneapolis in the 80s for budget cuts. And everybody knew they'd be rehired. But in my story, two of the cadets don't go back. One is Nil Shapiro, who becomes a private investigator. The other is his best friend, Anders Ellegard, who goes and works for a local suburban police department. And in the first book, they're reunited when that suburban police department faces their first murder in over 20 years with a very unusual crime scene. The book is called Gone to Dust. And a woman is found murdered in her home, and her body and most of the house are covered in the dust and dirt from hundreds of vacuum cleaner bags. And so there's so much DNA and hair and fiber samples in that the lab can't solve the crime. And the reason I did that, one is the police department would have to hire a consultant, which is Nils, and then Nils would have to use his own life experience and his personal relationships to inform his investigation, because it can't be solved with science. And so taking all that, I just backed into Nils' personal life, and that was the first book. There's been 2 others that were published in subsequent years. The last being 2019. The 4th book, called Dead West, is coming out. It was going to be June 2nd, but it's been pushed to August 4th. So it'll be out then.
Very cool. And Allen, you don't write a series, but you do write interconnected stories around the same community. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. My debut novel was The Life We Bury. The protagonist was a college student named Joe Talbert. But in that novel, there are secondary characters that I really liked, and I wanted to tell their stories going forward. One is a homicide detective named Max Rupert. I have a 3-book arc for his character. His girlfriend, Lila, she appears in 3 of the books. I'm currently writing her story, so she's the protagonist in this book I'm writing now. And then Bodhi Sandin, who's a law professor, my book that came out in 2019, Nothing More Dangerous, is a prequel to these people. It's Bodhi Sandin when he was 15 years old in 1976. So I like writing about a community of characters because, number one, my readers will recognize the characters from different books and have a certain loyalty and following because of that. But also at the same time, I can take a character who hasn't had a story done about him or her and do this arc where their character changes from beginning to end in a dramatic way. Something, it's a catharsis over the course of the novel. And rather than go to the next novel and have that same kind of crucible for that same character, I can go to a different character and say, now it's your turn to go through hell and have a story about you. And so I kind of stumbled into that just because I was writing for fun as opposed to following any kind of format or how people write series. And when I started getting published, I had all these different characters from this one center location. And I just enjoy the heck out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach because you have the benefit of familiar characters without sort of the trickiness of sort of reintroducing the same point of view book after book. It's writing
I do not have the ability to do a strong character arc over and over and over for the same character. I did a sequel for Joe, who The Life of Barry, he was the protagonist. I did a sequel for him, but I waited 5 years between the first book and the second book so that he was 5 years older and was starting this new journey from a new place in his life. Mm-hmm. So I have great respect for people who can do, a series with a character having these kind of arcs.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of Midwestern niceness. I think it's out there like, oh, the people in the Midwest are so nice, but we also have a lot of really great crime fiction that comes from the Midwest with a lot of bodies. So how do we reconcile the two? Are Midwesterners nicer than other people? What do you think?
Matt?
Well, yes and no. I think the social graces are nicer. I just went through this in my 4th book, because in my 4th book, I send Nils, a Midwesterner, to Los Angeles on a case. And as a private investigator, his asset in Minnesota is getting people to talk to him, to give him information. And that tough guy, I'm going to hit you over the head if you don't tell me, approach doesn't work here. I think people will just politely shut the door and say, no, thank you.
Right.
But out in Los Angeles, that approach got him nowhere. He had to amp it up a little bit. So I think of the Midwest, in the places I've lived in the Midwest, which are Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois and Minnesota, there is, especially outside of the Chicago area, but in these other areas, there is a theme that a lot of people have, which is try to fit in, and don't fall behind your neighbors, but also don't get way ahead and get real showy either. And I think Fargo is a perfect example of don't fall behind. This was a car dealer who had got in over his head and couldn't make his payments to the dealership, which led him to take extraordinary steps and foolish steps and deadly steps to catch up with his neighbors and be seen as a regular Midwesterner. So I think more than anything, that motivates a lot of crimes in Minnesota, even though there are serial killers here and horrible people, and like it's not black and white, but I do find that overall theme to be true in a lot of Midwestern crime fiction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting, the idea of the appearance of niceness and the appearance of success at all costs. Really, they kind of go hand in hand. The niceness that we have in the Midwest it's a politeness more than like necessarily a kindness.
Yes.
And the word nice gets thrown around. Like what does it even mean? But when people say that, I think they're talking about like the polite mannered way that we deal with each other, and then we go home and plot about killing each other. Yeah. Have you written about that, Alan?
I grew up in Missouri, and then I lived in Iowa for a little while, then Minnesota now. So I've always been in the Midwest. So I don't have a way to compare other than what I've seen in the Midwest as an attorney, as a criminal defense attorney. There are a lot of bad people in the Midwest, and I've met them personally, and I've sat in rooms with them. And the thing is, the bad people don't think they're bad people. I haven't met anyone yet who is as loathsome as murderer or rapist who thinks that they are a bad person, which was a wonderful education for me in terms of when I write a character and I talk about wanting to know the core of the character. When I write a bad guy, a bad person, I want to know why they think they're the hero of their own story.
Right.
And so I want to come at it with that perspective as well. They think they're nice. They think they're wonderful. What they're doing is something they have to do, or something that, there's an excuse, there's a reason, there's a justification there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Understanding the approach of your villains like that is definitely essential. So in terms of the Midwest as a setting for crime novels, I like to say that it's interesting to write about a Midwestern city in particular because, if you are in New York City and you drive for 40 minutes, you're very much still in New York City. Columbus, you drive for 40 minutes and you're surrounded by cornfields. So there's like this automatic tension between rural and urban that I think can sort of create a lot of interesting places to start stories. So do you deal with anything like that in your work, that juxtaposition of rural and urban, Matt? Oh, sorry. Alan, go for it.
Oh, go ahead, Alan.
That's you, Matt.
I do, especially in my second book. One of the bigger events in Minnesota every year is the high school hockey tournament. And it takes place in St. Paul. But there are often really talented teams that come from outstate. And in my second book, Broken Ice, there's a team from Warroad, Minnesota, which is a real town. It's 6 miles south of the Canadian border. And they're in the tournament, and a girl from Warroad goes missing. And that mixes, she goes missing in St. Paul, and it mixes the city. And then the story goes up to Warroad. And it is different. There's people have different concerns for their day-to-day life between rural and city. And it can generate some real conflict.
I think that living in Minnesota gives us a great opportunity to have any setting we really want other than a big mountain. We have the Great Lakes, so Lake Superior. So if you wanted to put something on the water where it's a danger on the water, you have that. You have a farming community. My fifth book took place in a farming community. My fourth book took place in the heart of the city and then ended on the Canadian border, where you're well out of cell phone range and you're out in the wilderness, and you have moose and bear and wolves. Within half a day's drive, you have any particular setting you want here in Minnesota. Plus you have really hot summers, not hot compared to Phoenix, and you have extremely cold winters, which is a wonderful thing to play with.
Yes. The Midwestern winter is like, things go behind doors, and that's just where all of the people go, sort of shack wacky, which I guess like it's not winter right now, but we've all got a little bit of that going on. Like this,
yes,
we're trapped inside and the tensions are running high. So let's talk a little bit about this current moment in time. How are you staying creative, Matt? What do you think?
The first week we were locked down and this was all kind of mushrooming. It was difficult for me to work. And then after that, I got back into it. I think it's difficult to write drama when there are more dramatic real events happening for people every day. But then I transitioned back into it, and I think for me it's just something to focus on, which helps me get through the day. Some people are making puzzles, other people are learning how to play an instrument, which must make everybody else in their family insane. But but
that's cruel, really.
I have found my daily habit of writing now to be very helpful for getting through it. I'm not quite as productive, I think, as I once was, because there is a point in the day where I want to turn on the news and see what's going on. But I have made a conscious choice not to write about this time. And I could be wrong, but I think people are going to be a little more in the mood for slightly lighter fare after coming out of this. Which I wrote a television pilot a couple weeks ago just to get that out of my system. That's a little bit lighter, almost like a detective show in the 70s or 80s. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Allen, how about you? How are you staying creative?
I've got this weird survivor guilt. Before COVID came along, I would get up in the morning, go down to my most comfortable chair in the basement, put my computer on my lap and crawl inside my head and write novels. After COVID, I get up in the morning, go down to my most comfortable chair, put my computer on my lap and crawl on my head. I really have not had any change in my existence. And there's all these people who are having all this tough time and suffering, and people losing their jobs and losing family members. And I have very little change in my life. It makes me realize how kind of isolated I was before all this. But yeah, I have a profession that allows me to keep doing what I love to do, without having to leave home.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable. I don't know about you, Kristen. My life has not changed that much, which speaks to my good fortune, I think, and my introversion. What about you?
Yeah, I've always worked from home, or the last few years I have. So same thing. Like it hasn't been a big transition to staying at home all the time, really. Like it's just like I wish I had the option of not staying home. I probably wouldn't exercise it. I want to go to a bookstore and touch everything, and like we can't do that right now, and it's really sad. Yeah. Well, I think at this point, I would like to welcome Abby from the Loft into the conversation so that she can moderate a Q&A from our audience.
Great. Thank you all so much. We have quite a few questions from our audience. We're really excited that you're here with us. So thanks for joining us. All right, let's get started with a question from Robert. Robert is wondering, how do you decide to write standalone stories versus continuing character arcs? What's the decision to continue Joe Talbert or Max Rupert versus creating another set of characters?
I come at the arc of a trilogy, or for example, Max Rupert, I have 3 books. Those 3 books are standalones if you read them individually, but if you read them in order, you will see a change of the character of Max Rupert. He starts out as the good brother in a good brother, bad brother story of the guise of another. He questions that and starts breaking the rules in the middle novel, The Heavens May Fall. And in the third novel, The Deep Dark Descending, he is facing his darkest nature because of that transition. So I had planned out that arc of his character before I started writing the books. And so it's always, for me, a character arc. Joe Talbert, I wrote a sequel, which isn't necessarily a character arc. However, there were things left unanswered, or open at least, at the end of Life for Barry that I wanted to go back into and look at, specifically his relationship with his mother. At the end of Life for Barry, Joe Talbert and his mother have this destruction of their relationship. And so in the intervening 5 years, they haven't spoken to each other. And he's basically disowned his mother. And I wanted to go back and explore whether or not there could be forgiveness. And so it was a new story with the same characters. So it really comes down to the arc of the internal story, the personal story for the character, that determines whether it's going to be 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, or more.
This sort of launches off of that question, and there's a question for both of you. Could you comment on the benefit and necessity of reading their books in the order written? And that's a question from Jim.
Go ahead, Matt.
My 4 books do not have to be read in order. I've heard from several readers who have not read them in order and still enjoyed them very much. That said, I made a conscious choice to arc the characters and relationships in my books. There are, especially in the private detective genre, there are characters who don't change. They're kind of a loner in the beginning. They go to work on a case, they find love on the case, and they solve the case, and the love doesn't work out. And in the next book, they're in the same place. I just made a choice not to do that. So I back Nils up into a not very functional place and designed a way for him to grow out of it. So they don't have to be read in order, but there is a benefit to reading them in order.
I'm on the same plane. I write each book so that if someone reads just that book and no other book of mine, at the end they say, this was a good book. It was well written, well constructed. I enjoyed it. I felt emotion. But if they read them, especially like the Max Rupert arc, they will see this change of the character. And there are little Easter eggs that will happen in a book, book number 5, that will reference other books. And if they will see the growth and the change in the characters, but that's not necessary for them to hopefully enjoy each book itself.
Is that true with your books as well, Kristen?
Yeah, I definitely think that readers who have started with the beginning will sort of get more from the nuances of the character development, but each plot is very much self-contained. And I really think that you can write a series in a way that each book can act as its own standalone or work as a piece of the bigger puzzle. And I think that you can enjoy it either way. I like to start at the beginning of series when I read a new series, just because I like to see it build. So I definitely like that approach, but it's important to be able to jump into a series no matter where you start and be able to enjoy it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to combine 2 questions because they're kind of in a similar vein. So these are both from Pam and Allison. Pam's wondering if you can talk about your experience doing presentations online versus in person at festivals. And Allison is wondering, how can we best support you as authors during these times?
I'll start. I love doing live events because of the energy that comes back. I try and be light and funny and entertaining. And so when I'm doing something like this and there's no laughter, it's not much fun, of course. But the best way to support me would be to, of course, purchase my books, but purchase them from an independent bookstore. I have never been invited to do a book signing by Amazon. They sell a lot of my books. I appreciate that. But independent bookstores are wonderful things. And there's all these different ways you can support them. If you want to do audiobooks, which I do almost all my reading now, audiobooks, Libro FM, you can buy your audiobook from Libro FM and they will pay a portion of the proceeds to the bookstore that you designate. So your favorite local bookstore. And you can order books and have them mailed to you from bookstores. A lot of people don't know that. And signed copies. When I'm going around when this is all over and I'm doing events, if you want a signed copy, contact a bookstore that's on my list of where I'm going to be, and they will set aside a book. I'll sign it and they'll send it to you. So your local bookstore is really the best way to support me.
Yeah, I agree with everything Alan said. These local bookstores they're like your favorite restaurant, like I'm trying to get takeout from them once in a while just to help support them during this time. And I'm also ordering my books from them, books to read. And I also miss the live events. This is great. This is way better than not doing it. And it's nice to connect with a lot of people from our individual homes, and especially through an organization like the Loft. The live thing, though, has a little extra kick to it, which I miss.
Yeah, I definitely miss live events, and it's just sort of you get that instant feedback on what you're saying, and you can sort of see what the audience is more interested in hearing more about. But I definitely think that doing a format like this is great because, like, I'm at least talking to you two. Whereas I did a Facebook Live thing not long ago, and it was just sort of like speaking into the void. It was terrifying. There was no one else to interact with at all.
And the upside of doing Zoom and Facebook is you get a lot more people coming to see your stuff. They have a lot more opportunity as opposed to having to drive to a bookstore at a specific time when they may be working, where they could just turn on the computer at work and boom, here we are.
Yeah. Right. Plus, after a live event is over, it's over. But we've got video of these that can live on forever, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
This seems like a great moment to plug that the button below this event right now is where you can purchase these books. And I think for this event, we're partnering with Milkweed, which is a local Minneapolis bookstore. So buy from them, buy these books. Awesome. Let's see. I think we have time for one or two more. Let's see. Who is more fun to write, the hero or the bad guy?
Bad guy.
Yeah. It is fun to. Yeah, I'm often asked, like, the people who rub you the wrong way in life, are they the ones you kill in your books? And I'm like, no. The bad guys are the people who rub me the wrong way in life. So it is fun to write them and have them get their comeuppance more often than not. Yeah. It's
also fun, as I said earlier, to get inside the head of the bad guy and try and see the world in a way that explains it. So they're the hero. As a person who just loves to daydream, that's delicious for me. I just love to get into the head of a really evil person and try and understand the world from their point of view.
See, this is a question from Patty, and it's for Alan. One of your characters lives in Logan Park in Minneapolis. They live in Logan Park too, and they're wondering why you chose that neighborhood to set your character in.
Actually, he in the book that's coming out in 2021, he will have sold his house in Lincoln Park. So, but I picked it because of the location. In The Life We Bury, we talked about earlier how you can go from being in downtown to an abandoned barn in 40 minutes. And that happens in the book. And I needed to have my cop, Max Rupert, living in a location where he has a shorter distance to get to that barn than what the protagonist had to get to that barn. So I put him in a northern suburb, and I went on Google Maps and looked around and thought that's probably the location where I would like him to drive from. Went down with a satellite, walked the neighborhoods, found a house, and said, that's his house. So that's how I found him.
Let's finish with a question for all three of you. Do you have any other mystery books or TV shows, movies that you really think nails the genre?
Oh, my favorite is Dennis Lehane and Tom Franklin. From my personal taste, they write very character-driven, more literary level mysteries. I love them. That's where I would go to. Thomas Harris, Sons and Lambs I'm re-listening to that right now. Cormac McCarthy, again, he No Country for Old Men is really a thriller, but it reads like a literary novel. So that's where I go to.
Just lately, I really like Don Winslow's new book, Broken. It's 6 novellas or long short stories, just really character driven stuff. They're not as, except for one of the stories, they're not as kind of macho and violent as much as The Cartel and The Force. Those books, these are a little more focused on character and things like that. I always recommend Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders to mystery fans because it's a mystery within a mystery. That's a lot of fun. There's a modern day regular mystery, and inside of it is kind of an Agatha Christie story. It's a mystery about a writer who's disappeared, a writer who has died, and trying to find the last chapter of his book. So you go through the whole book. It's quite a lot of fun.
I really love Kelly Garrett's series. It's a super fun set in Los Angeles, not quite cozy, but not hard-boiled mystery. So it's really like light and fun, but she is an absolute wizard at plotting. So I really love her books, Hollywood Homicide and Hollywood Ending. I also love the Sarah Gran Claire DeWitt mystery series, where it's it's not the traditional private investigator type of character, but she obviously understands the PI genre so well and is just playing with it by sort of including these really, really involved character arcs for her PI character, Claire. There's like one subplot that's set in her teenage years and another one that's set in her early 20s, and they just sort of overlap and combine. And I love those books just so much. And as far as sort of like a classic would go, I really love the Joseph Hansen, Dave Brandstetter mystery series. It's the first openly gay private eye character as a series, and those are just really great books. I think Raymond Chandler gets a lot of credit for his beautiful prose, but Joseph Hansen also writes incredibly beautiful prose, so it's definitely worth checking out for that noir-ish mid-century Los Angeles type of setting.
Great. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you guys so much. Thanks to Matt and Allen for sharing your process and your work, and Kristen with the Mystery Writers of America's Midwest chapter for this fantastic conversation. We are also super grateful to the Wisconsin Book Festival for presenting this event with us. We love partnering with you. And if you want more great virtual book events happening, check them out for sure. And speaking of gratitude, we're also grateful to St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, who are the presenting sponsors of the Loft's Wordplay. And if you'd like to support the Loft's programming just like this, you can do so by clicking the button below. You can also buy the books there. So please buy the books, support our Wordplay authors. Thank you again, and thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.